Hello, and welcome to the first of a new series of reflections from Sussex Street Christian Centre. I'm Glyn Watson, I'm the youth minister here, and I will be delivering these and posting these alongside Trevor Casey, the senior minister at Sussex Street Christian Centre. So we're starting a new series, and this series will be on the Ten Commandments. What these Ten Commandments mean, and what their application is for us today in this current situation. So let's start at the very beginning, just like the song from The Sound of Music says. Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. So what is the first of the Ten Commandments? I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Now this statement is so important that actually without it, none of the other 9 commandments would make any sense. And what I want to do is break that one statement down into sub-statements with a few critiques to begin with. So the first is that it states that God himself is giving these commandments. Not Moses or any other human being. It's God himself. The second thing to point out is that it was God. God is declaring and pointing out the fact that he was the one who delivered them from slavery. Not men. No human beings did this, not even Moses. Therefore, what God is implying is that you, I, everyone has an obligation to him. Now, obligation is a strong word, I understand, and I'm going to unpack a little bit further this obligation. So what is this obligation? Well, that you live by the following 9 commandments. This is what has come to be known as ethical monotheism. Now I want to define that because that can go, ooh. This is what it has 2 meanings. It means 2 things. Now it has 2 meanings. It means 2 things. So monotheism means that there is only one God, and the second one, ethical, is that God is the source of ethics and morality. Now, morality is an objective code of what is right and what is wrong. It does not come from human opinion. Morality doesn't come from human opinion, it comes from God. And that's what this statement is saying. This is what this commandment is saying. Therefore, it transcends, it's above human opinion. It's above mine, it's above Trevor's, it's above anyone else listening to this. The other meaning of ethical monotheism is this. What God most wants from me, from you, from us, is that we treat each other, that we treat other human beings morally. And when you look at the other 9 commandments, none of them concern really, when they're not concerned, they don't concern themselves with what humans must do for God. Pre-10 Commandments, religions believed that people must do a lot for their gods. For example, sacrificing people to them, or placing food at whatever shrine they had, whatever idol they had, or, figuratively speaking, feeding them. But But now, thanks to the 10 Commandments, what God wants is that we be good to our fellow human beings. Even the commandments concerning not having false gods and not carrying God's name in vain are ultimately about morality. The thing we can do for God is to treat everyone, our neighbours, decently. I want you to think of a parent or parents. And parents can relate to this, at least healthy ones can. They have an overwhelming joy at seeing their children act and treat they treat each other lovingly. And great pain when their children cause pain and hurt one another. So to God, who is likened to our Father in heaven, cares most about how you treat other human beings, all of whom are his creation. But as the title of Father suggests, that he considers them children. The third critical teaching we could take from this commandment is the importance and meaning of freedom. Freedom is something that we take for granted. And note that God isn't saying that he created the world in this first statement. He doesn't open with that. It would probably have made more sense if he had. But the one thing he declares is that he took the children of Israel, his children, out of slavery and into freedom. That's how much God hates slavery, that he would mention it in the first thing, in the first statement, and how important God considers freedom. God wants us, he wants you to be free. But there's another lesson and meaning to freedom that this commandment alludes to. You see, God is effectively saying, I took you out of slavery and into freedom, and these 10 commandments are the way to make a free society. You cannot be a free people if you do whatever you want. We get ourselves into all kinds of trouble and tie ourselves in knots, and we find ourselves chasing our tail. Freedom comes from an ability that grows and develops as we mature of self-control, moral self-control. The fourth and final thing that I want to point out. You see, by telling us that he liberated the Hebrew slaves in this particular context, God made clear that he cares deeply about human beings, about us, about you. It is impressive to create a world. But what most matters is not only that there is a creator, that he himself is that creator, but he wanted to communicate a particular message. He wanted to communicate to his people that he, the creator, cares about his creation, and that includes you. All of that is in that first commandment. And there are so many implications, and each one could be unpacked further. But I want to focus on one of the points right now. And that's the point of freedom. Why? Well, because God cares about the world we are living in today and the situation we find ourselves in globally, nationally, locally, and individually. Think about it. We are in a situation as a people that is unlike anything we have experienced before. The first lockdown due to a virus, because we as a people have a knowledge of viruses and how they spread and also how to limit that spread. We don't, however, know yet how to cure this particular virus. We know in a limited sense how to treat it, And for those who are suffering, we are trying, the NHS and all of those people in caring roles are trying to help those suffering with it the best they can. God sees it. He knows it. And he cares about it. And I'm sure his heart breaks to see his creation suffer. And yet, in his heartbreak, I'm sure he is smiling when he sees the way that people have responded to the needs of those around and treating one another kindly with care. Such things as food banks and all the volunteers that are putting themselves on the front line. What about the inspirational story of Captain Tom Moore raising money for the NHS by walking 100 laps in his back garden and raising an absolutely crazy amount of money? I think it was around about 20 odd million the last time I checked. You see, neighbours are finally talking to one another and showing concern by asking how they're getting on and whether they need anything. The public clapping in appreciation for the NHS and all of the hours that they're spending putting themselves on the front line and putting themselves at risk. What about families having to spend more time together? Learning to be together, being creative together, loving and caring for one another. What about the amount of prayer that's just exploded because of all of this? What about the calling and the texting on a more regular basis for those who are vulnerable? Those who are lonely and in isolation and don't have anyone else in the house? There are many, many more, and I'm sure you're screaming them at the screen, saying, "You didn't mention me." Or you didn't mention this. Now, is this the freedom that God is calling for and would like to see his people operate in and live in? A few questions. Was the busyness of pre-COVID-19, before all this started, was all the busyness of life a form of modern day slavery? Keeping me, keeping you and every other individual in slavery out of busyness. Will we go back to the way things were before, once all of this is blown over? Are our values changing? The amount of people I have heard say, pre-COVID-19, for many years, due to busyness, say things like this: I wish I could spend more time with my family. I wish I had more time to call and help those family members who are lonely. I'm sure if you were honest with yourself, you have also felt or said something similar. Wouldn't society benefit greatly if we practiced a moral duty to one another, firstly to God, to his call, to put him above all other gods like work, housework, sport, and focus on loving and caring for one another through this difficult time and beyond. You see, what would society look like if we saw morals and values from the correct source, God himself first?